Okay, I think it says we're streaming.
All right. Hey, everybody.
Alrighty, it's working. Sorry, we were having some technical difficulties. Sorry for the delay, but we are here and we are live. There he is, popping in. Well, thanks for joining us on the Overflow. We're so glad to have you here. It's a great opportunity to walk through our Sunday sermon and talk about how we practically engage with the topic and live it out. Questions we have, thoughts, reflections, all that sort of stuff. If you're watching live, we'd love to have you comment in the comment box and ask us questions or just say something you like. And we definitely would be happy to respond with you. On the call today, we have Miss Erin.
Hi.
And we have Mr. Ryan.
Hey.
And other Ryan. So I'll be other Ryan today. So I'll give you a break. But as always, we start with a recap of the sermon. And so take it away, Pastor Ryan.
Yeah, so continuing our One Another series, we talked about two statements on humility and having humility towards one another. And I talked about how true humility is neither having a lot of pride, and I think pride comes when we compare ourselves to others, when we think we're better than other people. And I talked about how Adam and Eve had a sin of pride because they thought they knew better than God in the garden. But humility is neither pride nor thinking too lowly of ourselves, like hating ourselves, having really low self-esteem, thinking we're not good enough. But it's about how we find our goodness and we find our value in Christ and what he did for us, and that he makes us good, not in that we're good. And if you listened, I kind of railed against the idea of like, I'm a good person yesterday. And then I went on to talk about how Jesus is the ultimate example of humility in washing the disciples' feet, in his death on the cross, and how we're to do. And then I also talked about how we're to do nothing from selfish ambition or vain conceit, to the idea of engaging in self-promotion, doing something for attention from others, or doing something just so we can get to an end goal that we have for ourselves, and not caring about other people along the way. And then I talked about 4 ways which we can practice, or 4 ways we can help practice humility in a deeper way in relationship with others.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah, I love this series we're doing that we've titled Woven Together, especially during this season of trying to come out of the COVID-19 stay at home and navigating quarantine, and a lot of us really seeing how we need people, we need each other, and we were created for community, which we've been talking about for a year now. And just all that's going on with racial injustice being highlighted, and just the unity that's taking place of people coming together for causes and for people and for justice. And, this week we got to talk through humility and what that looks like. And it's incredibly important to community. And so let's talk today a little bit about what humility is and what it isn't, and just some things that kind of stand out when it comes to engaging with humility in our relationships with one another. So what are some things that humility is, and how do we live that out in a practical way in our daily life?
Ryan Bogert, you had a really great working definition in your sermon yesterday. Do you happen to have that you can...
I had 2 definitions for the Greek word for humility, which I found as entry definition 1 and 2 in one of my sources. The first one or the second one?
I was thinking of the second one, I think.
Yes. So it says the Greek word for humility, which is tapeiноphrosunen, is an inside-out virtue produced by comparing ourselves to the Lord rather than to others. This brings behavior into alignment with this inner revelation to keep one from being self-exalting, self-determining, or self-inflated.
Yeah, I love that, because I feel like when we think about humility, or at least like my natural go-to would be like it's the opposite of pride. But I really love the way that you frame it, that like humility is viewing ourselves in light of who God is and what God has done. And I really love that angle that you took yesterday.
Right. And I think some people might be confused as to what that means, because when we compare ourselves to God, then it's like, well, me compared to God, wow, I suck. But And I talked about this a little yesterday, but how I interpret that, what I think that means is it's more about avoiding comparing ourselves to others. Because I think when we compare ourselves to others, we tend to think, oh, well, I'm better than so-and-so because they're messed up in this way. And I'm better than so-and-so because they're messed up in this way. But when we compare ourselves to God, we recognize some biblical truths that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. That's all of us. We've all sinned. I don't think I'm better as a pastor than anyone. I still struggle with sin, and sin's still a big part of my life that I fight against. So I find humility that I'm grounded in that. And then, but recognizing that my value is found in God, and how God chose to send his son to die on the cross for me. And he said, you have value, and sent a son to die on the cross for me. And that washes me clean of my sin and all my inadequacies. So it's about finding your value in what God has done for you and finding security in that. And that, I think, avoids both becoming prideful in ourselves and in our own actions, capabilities, talents, whatever, morality, whatever, and B, from thinking, oh, I'm not worth anything, I'm worthless, because God said you are worth it when he did that. So it's finding that tension there. I feel like a lot of Christianity is finding the tension and finding the right place in the middle to live within and to operate out of, kind of. So yeah, that's how I think about what that means.
Yeah, I love that. When I think about humility, I often think about it's my perspective of myself through the lens of others, or in relationship to others. But this definition clarifies that the humility, like, relationship, needs to first be between you and God. It's about seeing how great and perfect and awesome God is, and how good he is, and then realizing that you are who you are. You are loved, and you are valued, and you are cared about, but you are also sinful and rebellious and incomplete, and we have faults. And so humility is like honestly recognizing our rightful place in comparison to God, for better and for worse, the good and the bad. And I think we often focus too much, like you talked about, Ryan, on comparison. Like, let me find somebody else who sucks and let me think, I'm doing great, like, or let me find somebody else who's amazing and go like, I just suck, and so, and then we force ourselves into a comparison game. And so I think keeping our eyes on God keeps us in our rightful place. And being humble is not a bad thing, but it's definitely a good thing. One of the things that we talked about too is part of humility is considering others more significant, like out of Philippians. And it's like, well, what does it mean to consider others more significant? And my wife and I were talking this morning about significance and value and contribution, even just in our family as parents and as husband and wife. And I was telling her how I function like how I function, like with my strengths and my weaknesses and my perspective of the world. And I often will see her functioning and contributing through the lens of how I function. And so if, let's just say, it's getting ready in the morning, I have a certain flow, a certain process, a certain way to prioritize things. I have a certain list of what needs to get done and what doesn't need to get done. And whatever she does, I see through the lens of, is that contributing or not to my view of how this time needs to go? And a lot of times, if it's not exactly what I expect her to do or want her to do, it doesn't fit in my view. And then I can get upset at her. I can say, like, you're not contributing or you're not doing anything. And that can make her feel insignificant and worthless and like she's doing something wrong because it doesn't fit into my paradigm. But if you flip that over and we look at her view of what the morning should look like, it's like I'm doing things that are not like fitting into her routine and her way and her strengths. And so part of considering others as more significant is almost valuing their contribution, participation, perspective, and engagement above your own. And so a big thing that God is teaching me is, how do I do things and lead things, not so that I can shine, but so that everyone else can shine. Not so that I can look bad, but that I can set everyone else up to win. And I think a lot of leaders make the mistake of leading in a way that they only look strong and good and right and excellent, and everyone looks inferior, rather than leading in a way where everyone can contribute their gifts and be recognized and participate and engage on an equal footing. So there's a united win together. And I think that's just kind of like a big kind of deep thing that God is teaching me, is how do I lead and love in a way that sets everyone up for success rather than just making myself look good and having my own goals be accomplished. I think part of the language in Philippians is do nothing from selfish ambition. Like, don't let your motivation be making yourself look good, even in the smallest way. So I think, yeah, that definitely stood out to me.
Yeah, and I think unpacking that selfish ambition idea or vain conceit idea from the passage, it's like do nothing that's just focused entirely on your own gain. Like as Christians, we shouldn't be doing things where it's like, well, what's going to happen out of this is I'm going to get a big pay raise that I go on this vacation so I can like, and I mean not that those things are inherently bad, but are only if that's our only lens that we're looking at things, then there's something wrong there because we need to be thinking about others in how we're living our life, like what our purpose is. So I think it's more of like living with a others focused purpose versus living with a me focused purpose in a sense. And also like doing things that, like you kind of talked about your leadership example, like a lot of leaders act in a way so they shine, and the idea of vain conceit is like don't do things that are the purpose is to draw attention to yourself. And we also see that both in that phrase and also in other parts of scripture, like the rich man giving in the temple versus the poor woman, he's only doing it for the attention. Or the passage about praying in public, don't pray in public like the Pharisees who did it to draw attention to themselves so people know how holy they are, but pray in private because then your father truly hears you, and you will, and the Pharisees in praying in public earned what they all they deserved, but those who pray in private, there's a greater good in that. So the idea of just not doing things focused on the self, not doing things focused on what I am going to get out of it. That and instead having a mindset again, like how can you lift others up, like you were talking about, help others to shine, how can I serve others in my day-to-day life. Doesn't mean neglecting the self or neglecting self-care, but living with an others focused mindset. And I think most Christians struggle with that. It's I think a lot of Christians don't even understand how that call even can often is we are called to think like that all the time. So yeah, it's a challenging call.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I think, what you're saying, it forces us to have to reflect and ask the question of what is my motivation behind this action or behind this thought? And is there any part of what I am doing that is motivated by a desire to be noticed and seen and acknowledged and praised? And unfortunately, I would say the majority of my motivation is in those things. I want to say things that will make people go, wow, you're awesome. And then I could say, oh no, thank you.
Wow, Brian, that's such an awesome point. You're so smart.
Just, and then I can play the humble card of like, oh no, I'm just dumb, actually. So, but yeah, there's so much motivation of wanting to be seen and noticed and heard and recognized. And in fact, people would say that our core desire is to be fully known and fully loved. And so I think there is a good God-given desire there to be fully known and fully loved by him and by his people. But there's an unhealthy motivation that can come where everything we do, or a lot of what we do, is out of a desire to be acknowledged and praised and appreciated. And then we start to do whatever we can. We make decisions on choices based on what will get us the most attention or acknowledgement or support or praise or things like that. So I think we have to, it's a deep level. I think you said in your sermon, like it's a heart thing, it starts down in the core of our soul and our being. We have to be fulfilled and satisfied by God alone and not seeking that desire to be noticed and recognized and praised all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about what humility is not. So what comes to mind when I kind of bring up that phrase, humility is not, or what are some things we do in the name of humility that are definitely off track?
Yeah, Brian, when you preached this part, I really resonated with that, because I think my inclination is to not speak up and call it humility, right? Or like when you were saying that, like, humility isn't low self-esteem or thinking, less of yourself, like you don't have a place at the table with everyone else, kind of thing. And I resonated with that a lot, because I think my natural inclination is to not speak up or not stir the pot or not be bold in the name of humility, but that's not what humility is. Do you know what I mean? And so I really appreciated that you took the time not only to talk about what humility is, but what it isn't. That was really impactful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I think people tend to gravitate towards either feeling the pridefulness or feeling the I'm not good enough or I don't have something valuable to contribute. And again, like I said earlier, it's like living in the tension. It's kind of living in the healthy medium in the middle. Like I believe I have gifts as a pastor that have equipped me to do this job well, and but I don't, at least I very much try not to. I try not to let that inflate my ego or inflate like thinking like, oh, how good or how awesome I am, because I recognize, those are all gifts that I have from God. Everything that I have comes from God. Anything good that I can do as a result of that is again from God, and that's a gift. And I think that helps keep me in a humble posture where it's like I have something of value to contribute that is from God, and that I think helps stop me from thinking in a arrogant or prideful mindset. Um, but I think humility is, um, you know, like you said, recognizing the value you have to contribute to conversations, the value you have to speak up when it is necessary to speak up, not feeling like low self-esteem or scared to speak up, um, but um, just having an appropriate sense of where that all comes from, where all the things that we have to offer come from, and then finding our value in the way how God sees us, not how we see ourselves, not how others see us. And we could see ourselves in a good light or a bad light, depending, on who you are and where you're at emotionally. But seeing ourselves how God sees us, um, made in His image, worth dying for, loved by Him. So
Yeah. I remember seeing a cartoon, like one of those little funny comical newspaper cartoons a while back, and there were two people looking in mirrors, and one person looking in the mirror was a pretty good looking person, and when they looked in the mirror, they looked really horrible, whatever that looks like. That's just what the cartoon portrayed. And the other person next to them like didn't look so great, but when they looked in the mirror, they saw something like phenomenal. And it's just interesting, those just different personalities. I can definitely relate to looking in the mirror and seeing something phenomenal. I remember being in like dance class in college, and like I was in hip hop dance and modern dance, and like we like film our dances, and I was so proud to like show it and like look how good I look. And Hartley, my wife, who's like a legitimate like trained dancer, was like proud of me. It's like as you'd be proud of your kindergartner for doing like their first homework assignment. It's just like good job, baby, that's nice. And I'm like, this is Bob. Like I should be competing on World of Dance. Like I should be like doing this. And she's like, okay, sure, sure. Because I just always see myself as like way better than other people see myself, which is funny, but it's just my default. And so a cheap, inaccurate version of humility would be like, oh, I just see myself too well. I'm just gonna look at myself like I'm crap, like I'm really bad. So, but that's not what humility is calling us to do. I think there's a degree at which we should adjust how we view ourselves based on what God sees. But a lot of what I see my need to grow in humility is how I value other people. And so
yeah.
that's why I would say like an easy mistake is low self-esteem, because it's quick and easy and cheap. It's easy to just look down on yourself. I think it takes a lot more work to look at everyone else and to really think through who they are and to really value them and to really treat them in a way where you practically value them. That just takes a lot more, at least for me, a lot more effort and energy to do. Not saying that I don't value other people, like I'm not, this horrible person. Um, but to really spend the time, like, who is this person and what are they gifted at and what are they passionate about and how do I support them and how do I encourage them and how do I build them up and how do I help carry them to a place of success, just takes more effort than adjusting my own perspective. myself. So I think the real hard work of humility takes time and love. And
Mm.
yeah, uh, it has to come from a place of loving others. Like, I love you so much that I want you to do well, versus how can I look really good, or look successful in this time. So I think the true work of humility really does take time and relationship, for sure. Okay. Any other last things that stand out from the sermon, or any topics you wanted to talk through, or anything on all this?
I think
I'll just say this: we're getting some applause from Monica, so thank you, Monica, for your comments of applause. Awesome, longtime faithful parent watcher. Thank you. Okay, the last thing I'll throw out there, that's just a thought I've been thinking through for humility, is just that a lot of our society, our capitalistic structured society, is based on working hard and building yourself up. And a lot of people take that as step on whoever or whatever you need to get to the goal that you're trying to reach. And humility is the opposite approach. It's lifting up those around you and valuing them on your way to success. In a sense, success is not about what you can accomplish, but how you can build others up around you for their own growth and healing and accomplishments and stuff like that. Humility is truly caring and valuing other people more than just yourself, but definitely not to the point of degrading yourself. And it's sort of, if we're all lifting each other up together, then we all get lifted. And I always go back to Jesus's restructuring of the Old Testament laws by saying, love God and love your neighbor as you love yourself. Like, the idea of loving your neighbor and loving yourself, being on equal footing, of equal importance, and getting equal time, energy, and investment. And a lot of us are more on the extremes. We either put a lot into our own life and we don't care much about others, or we care a lot about others and we don't do much for our own life. And we've really got to do both to love the way that we've been commanded to.
Yeah, and I'll just briefly add to that. I think there are many ways in which our country and the modern 21st century society we live in promotes values that do not align well with Christianity. There's many good things about America, there's many bad things about America. And I think one thing that's challenging is that we live in a culture that's very individualistic. Like, we're just really focused on our own families, our own jobs, like our bubbles only cross paths with other people, like maybe at church and I guess, friends at work. But it's like, are we really caring deeply about like what's going on in their life? So I think our society is set up to make valuing others as greater than yourself very difficult. Um, and then making that posture of humility difficult. And even the American dream, like the idea of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, the idea of like, oh, like, I'm gonna work really hard and I'm gonna financially make it. Like, there's something in that. It doesn't have to be, because someone could have a heart of generosity in that, but that sounds like something that sounds like selfish ambition, as we kind of talked about in the verse earlier today, where it's like, oh, I want to work hard so I can get rich so I can live comfortably. Like, that's, Jesus doesn't call us to make a lot of money and live comfortably. Not that those things are, again, inherently bad, but that's not our motivation. If that is your main motivation for what you're doing, there is something inherently bad about that, I would say. So I think a lot of the hard work of Christianity for me, as I've grown as a Christian, is evaluating the values and things that I'm faced with in society, things like individualism, capitalism, like, Ryan, you were talking about, and valuing like what of this is good and aligns with God's will for me, what of this is bad and doesn't align with God's will for me. And I think very often we in the church let those things go unquestioned or unexamined. So I would encourage anyone listening, think through those things. Think about, what are my motivations? Am I living the individualistic life where I'm just focused in my own bubble? Or am I truly finding ways in my life to value others as greater than myself? is my motivation selfish ambition, and do I need to check my heart and where I'm coming from in my own heart, in terms of, do I have a humble heart in how I'm approaching the world, in a recognizing where I stand, not being prideful, not being low self-esteem, but recognizing my value in God and God being the source of my goodness. And B, am I valuing others in humility? Am I doing actions for others, and finding ways in my life to put others above myself? So anyways, those are just thoughts, because you kind of brought up the America capitalism piece, but it's tough. It's tough, and none of us are going to be perfect in these areas and able to focus on others all the time, but I just challenge people to examine, how can I do this more? What are my motivations, and how can I serve others in my own life? And am I doing that at all right now? That might be a question some people need to ask themselves. So anyways, those are all just thoughts that I had.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Okay, any other final thoughts, or we're ready to sign off? Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us on the Overflow, and we hope that God blesses you this week, and that you've been blessed by this conversation and the sermon topic, and just gathering together as a church, and we will see you next Monday at noon. Okay, take care.